You're watching Swimming World TV, and I'm your host, Brent Rutemiller, and you're in the ready room with USA Swimming's Executive Director, Chuck Wielgus. Thanks for joining us, Chuck.
Glad to be here, Brent.
Now, Chuck, you've been on the job now for close to 20 years.
Approaching.
And let's go back to the beginning. I mean, there was a lot of people who wanted this position, and you were selected. So don't be humble. Why do you think you were selected over all the other candidates to take this position?
Well, I think there were three things immediately come to mind. One was that I had experience. I had 10 years experience as a coach and a little bit of it doing summer swim league coaching. But I also had experiences leading other sports organizations. Been the executive director of the U.S. Canoe and Kayak team, another Olympic sport, for almost 2 quads, and was with the Senior PGA Tour before I came to swimming. So I think that set of experiences certainly qualified me. Second is that I really understood the culture around Olympic sports, and that's what the 2 quads with canoe kayak did for me. And not only understood it, but embraced it. I mean, I love the community. Yeah. Athletes, coaches, parents, officials, volunteers, even magazine publishers, part of that community. And third, I think I was able to share with the board of directors a vision for the future of what swimming could become.
Well, with that in mind, what were the weaknesses very early on that you identified that you identified as being within your vision, let's just say?
Well, I think to the contrary, I didn't see weaknesses, I saw opportunities. I saw a very strong infrastructure of programs, a strong base of membership, of coaches, of clubs, and I just saw an enormous opportunity to help promote that and to tell that story to a broader audience and to have swimming become an everyday, every year sport, not just an Olympic year sport.
Well, I'm glad you identified the administrative side and the programs, because a lot of times you can have the administration become overbearing into the actual sport itself. And in our case, it'd be the dry side and the wet side. Mm-hmm. How did you really define what was going to be the dry side and what was going to be the wet side? And how did you set boundaries for your staff not to go too deep into those areas, but yet integrate them all together?
Well, there's a lot in that question. But I think first it starts with having a service mentality. I really saw my role being as a lead servant to the sport. Second was having a great respect for the technical side of the sport. I think one of the wonderful things about swimming is that we acknowledge that there isn't one way to get to the top of the mountain. And so a great respect for the coaches. And I saw the coaches as the system. And I guess the third part of it, and you'll see I like to think in threes, but the third aspect of that was an opportunity to help. What I first said to the staff was, I want to make everybody damp. I want the folks on the wet side of the sport to really understand and appreciate the business side of the sport, and the folks on the business side of the sport to really understand the technical aspects and why decisions were made. Mm-hmm. So I think those were the key elements, at least at the beginning.
Well, you also set out 3 core objectives. And we're all hearing it over and over and over again, but I think they still rings true today. And those 3 core objectives were build the foundation, build the membership, build the base. Mm-hmm. Second would be to promote the sport, and then to achieve competitive success. Right. Where was the membership base when you said build the base? Where was it when you first took over, and where is it now?
Well, I'm not sure what the exact numbers were when I first came, but what I can tell you is over the last 10 years, we've enrolled over 100,000 new athletes into the sport. Our membership has grown 46% just in the last 10 years. And I think the other thing that we're seeing happening with the sport is the retention rate is really high. The average retention rate for youth sports is somewhere between 60 and 70%, and we're north of 70%. So that retention rate is really important. So it's bringing in new kids, but also keeping the kids we got.
Mm-hmm. And promoting the sport. How was the sport being promoted back in '96? And let's don't go into where it is now, but where was it then? And what did you see then that you felt could be done better?
Well, I think the U.S. USA Swimming really wasn't set up to promote itself. It was more reactive, kind of like a sports information office at a college or university, where a query would come in from someone in the media, they'd want some information, and the organization would respond to it. And the shift we made was to go from being reactive to being proactive, to really developing a strategy to promote the sport and then acting on that strategy. So I think that notion of going from reactive to proactive was really the pivot point in how we looked at promoting our sport.
And does that go back to the core of your original vision when you were hired? I mean, was that the one area you felt could really change?
I think that was the area where the board of directors thought I was the strongest. That I brought a vision that was going to kind of elevate the presence of the sport within the general public and within the media, so it wasn't just viewed as an Olympic year, an every 4 year sport.
And then achieve competitive success. I think that speaks for itself. USA Swimming has been doing a fabulous job, on the Olympic level. Are there certain successes that you like to highlight, or how do you look at that?
Well, I think it's a credit to the athletes and the coaches. And I think our role as administrators is to support them in any way we can. And so I look at our ability to achieve sustained competitive success, and sustained is really the key word in there for me, is to provide a steady base of resources and opportunities that will give our top athletes and coaches the wherewithal to do what they need to do, to have the resources to do to support their training, to support getting athletes to competitions that they might not otherwise be able to go to. And increasingly now we're looking at kind of the transition area, the junior team program, and providing more opportunities for more athletes and for more coaches to have opportunities to be assigned or selected for international trips.
So philosophically speaking now, when you go back and you set out these 3 core objectives, are they now, and when you reflect on this, are they independent of each other, or are they dependent on each other? Meaning, in order to achieve success, do you need to build the base, or by achieving competitive success, you ought to automatically build the base? Vice versa, by just promoting it, does it build a base, which then turns into have success? Have you ever contemplated and kind of look at how those 3 things interact?
Oh, I not only contemplated it, I mean, that was the idea from the beginning, that we would have 3 objectives that were simple, that were memorable, and that were aspirational in nature. And build, promote, and achieve work like a wheel. They feed each other. Athletes have success, we get more public attention and recognition. That gives us more opportunities to promote the sport. That attracts more kids into the sport. So it's a continuous rolling wheel. All 3 of them are interdependent.
So moving down to some other areas here, and we all know that USA Swimming has been vilified in the media in recent years for being not so safe a sport. And you and your staff have been the public face of all of this. Mm-hmm. And I know personally that you've worked very hard to implement things to go in a different direction, but yet it still keeps coming back that you weren't proactive enough, you didn't go back deep enough into the sport. When you specifically, that there are coaches who are sexual abusers within the sport, when did you first become aware of this problem?
Well, I think anyone who works as a coach, a teacher, a camp counselor is aware that there are people within our society who act inappropriately with minors. And so it's been a little frustrating because swimming maybe has been singled out, and I think we've in part been singled out because the sport has kind of risen and has had a higher profile. But the fact of the matter is that the overwhelming majority of our coaches are, next to a parent, a coach has the best opportunity to impact a young person's life. And what we've done over the last 4 to 5 years is put in place, I think, a safe sport program that is among the best, if not the best, of all youth sport programs. And so to go back to your question about when did I first become aware, I think it's something that I've been aware of for since I first started coaching. But as an organization, I think it really came onto our plate, about 4 or 5 years ago, that people felt this is something we needed to be accountable for, and we've accepted that responsibility.
Well, let's go to the 2020 interview, where you were portrayed there as not taking personal responsibility for the issue altogether. And were you, looking back at that interview, was that a turning point in everything coming to a head? And two, were you portrayed accurately in that interview? What's your reflection on all that?
Well, it was a terrible day, and it was a poor performance on my part. And was it a turning point? In a way, yes, it was. And I think that what we have done since then, that should be how we should be measured, by the actions we've taken to help our sport become, I think, the safest sport there is for any kid to participate in. With the programs, the education, the way we've raised awareness. So we can be vilified for one day, one time, not saying the right thing at the right moment. But I'd like to think that over the course of time, people will judge our organization and its leadership on what was actually done.
So what good came from that interview, both for you personally and for the organization?
Well, I think the good that came for the organization is that we've raised awareness, that we now have mandatory training for coaches and for all of our non-athlete members. All of our officials have to go through training programs. We have optional training programs for athletes and their parents. And we've talked about the issue. So by raising awareness, I think we've helped to create an environment that is where this subject isn't taboo anymore. That if somebody sees something happening that they think is inappropriate, they report it. Yeah. And we now have the pieces in place to deal with those reports.
And it all comes under the title Safe Sport.
Correct.
With people in place now to dealing with these issues in that regard. When you look at all that you've done to be proactive on this, and it's taken a huge amount of your time, but yet there's still vocal critics out there that won't recognize that effort, to the point where you had to take your name off of being inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. Where do you find the motivation to go on?
Well, we're doing the right thing, and that's the most important thing. And my focus has always been on doing the work. And if other people have different perspectives on that, then I would challenge them to look at what's actually been done. And I think that's where we're going to hang our hat, on the work that's been done and the safer environments we've created for the kids who are members of our sport.
Well, when it comes to your personal challenges, that being in the business world, you were honored in 2011 with the Cancer Awareness Award for your overcoming colon cancer, which was first diagnosed in 2007. And then in 2012, you had a setback and had treatment that obviously has done very well for you. How do you motivate people around you, and how do you really stay strong when you have that on top of everything else? 'Cause I think it's very inspiring what you've gone through in that regard.
Well, I wouldn't wish it on anybody else. I've been to the edge twice, and when you come back from that, you really have a perspective, and you appreciate the things around you. And I'm fortunate. I've got two wonderful families, one at home and one where I work. And my daily challenge is to lead by example and to try to set the tone for, not only what we're going to do, but how we're going to do it. And that's motivation enough for me.
Well, and we always hear good things from the staff, and they all follow your leadership in those areas. Looking at the broader picture of where USA Swimming is across the country, diversity. Diversity was something that was brought to the table. We're still perceived, the sport is, that is, as a white, middle, upper income sport. What things have been put in place, and where are we going with this, and what's your vision at this point?
Diversity and inclusion is a real challenge for not only for us, but for a lot of other sports. And it's especially difficult for us because of the facility and access issue. It's hard for a kid to learn how to play golf if they don't have access to a golf course. But we are fully committed to having the demographics of our sport over the course of time better reflect the demographics of society at large. And this is not a sort of this is not a piece of the puzzle that gets solved in 1 year or 2 years. This is a 30-year campaign to change the demographics of our sport. So we're doing it piece by piece. We have recently set up a program with the New York City Parks and Recreation Department, and we now have 600 new members and 50 new member coaches from very diverse backgrounds, and we're helping them to become a stronger competitive swimming program. We have select camps where we now bring in both athletes and coaches to Colorado Springs and try to provide them with education and resources. We're increasingly looking to expand the things that we can do in both Hispanic, Latino communities, as well as African American communities. And actually, the fastest growing segment of our membership is our outreach. So it's a long campaign. We're making progress. We've got a long way to go, but it's one of the most important things that we're doing for the future of our sport.
Well, one of the things that you did, I don't know how long ago, but during your tenure, was set up the Swim Foundation, which, when you look at this, it's like, whoa, now we have another organization within an organization, a separate nonprofit and all of that. But yet, is this foundation, which some of this falls under what you just mentioned with the diversity and the outreach, give us a temperature on where you see that right now.
Well, the foundation's 10 years old, and it was originally set up because we felt that the one area that we hadn't really taken advantage of to the extent that we could was philanthropy. We felt that there were people who would want to contribute, and companies and organizations. And we have, one of the initial missions of the foundation was to help the diversity, to attack the diversity issue. So we began the Make a Splash program. Make a Splash program today has local partners in all 50 states. There are more than 600 local partners across the nation. And more than 3 million kids have been touched by swim lessons. And about 250,000 of those kids have been scholarshiped. These are kids who otherwise would have never had the opportunity to learn how to swim. So that's the mouth of the pipeline. And I think one of our challenges going forward now is to find ways to give those kids who have learned to swim the opportunity to think about joining a swim team. And that's one of the new areas that we're very excited about working on.
Well, when you look at that whole entity, then you throw in this golden goggles thing, which I guess we're 10 years into that also. Well, they both were started about the same period at the same time. I mean, that's a huge ask, coming on an organization. But where the golden goggles are now, and it's, for our viewers out there, it's the annual awards where we recognize the greatest in the sport, and it alternates between the New York and East Coast and West Coast and LA. Is it meeting your vision?
Absolutely, it is. We set the golden goggles up with two objectives. The first objective was to kind of have an annual gathering where we bring together the swimming community and we'd recognize the accomplishments of our national team athletes and their coaches. And so that to this day remains the number one objective of that evening, to celebrate their accomplishments. And then number two, to have the event become a fundraising event for the foundation. So over the past 10 years, we've raised more than $3 million for the foundation, which is helping to support not only the Make a Splash program, but the national team program as well. So we could be more pleased with the success of the Golden Goggles.
Fabulous. Olympic trials. You know, you were on the front end of saying, let's take this to another level. Now we find it's in an indoor arena with temporary pools. The atmosphere is electrifying. Did you see this where it is now? Did you see it getting to this point when you first envisioned this or moving in this direction?
Well, I've looked into my crystal ball a number of times in my life, and some of the things I've seen haven't come to fruition. But this is one.
We can talk about those too. You like?
Well, there's some funny stories there, but this is one that did. And actually, I remember the exact moment. I was the last night of the 2000 Olympic trials, and it was at the Natatorium in Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And
which was considered the home. That was the palace. That was why change?
That was the Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
For swimming. And the last event is the men's 1,500 meters, and Eric Vent becomes the first American male to go under 15 minutes. And I had climbed up to the top of the diving board, the 10-meter platform, surveying the whole scene, and it was electric. I mean, the crowd was excited, and when I came down from that platform after, our staff was all excited, the officials were all excited, and I said to some of our staff, meet me for breakfast in the morning because we've got an event that's busting at the seams. And it's just dying to grow, and we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. And that's what led us down the path to have the 2004 trials in Long Beach in an outdoor swim stadium with 10,000 seats.
And they'll be in Omaha again this year.
Be in Omaha again. In 2012, we sold over 160,000 tickets. We were live all 8 nights on NBC. That'll happen again in 2016. And quite frankly, we're looking beyond that. What are we going to do in 2020 and 24? So it's one of the most exciting and fun projects that we get to work on.
If you want to share one of those ideas that didn't work, I mean, this would be your opportunity, but
well,
it's putting you on the spot there.
It's a story that some of the people I work with know well, but I was asked to help run an event in 1982 that we called the National Snow Surfing Championships. And we held this event in Woodstock, Vermont, and it was a miserable cold day. We had 26 competitors. There was a guy named Jake Burton. There was another fellow named Tom Sims, who's went on to have a pretty big career in the skateboard industry. And when the event was, actually my kitchen table was the start gate, and we turned it upside down so the legs came up, and that's how they started. And we all met in the clubhouse after, and they were after me to start planning the 1983 event, and I told them that the sport is going nowhere.
Oh.
And so fast forward 20 years,
Yeah.
and I got a call from the after party of the U.S. Open Snowboarding Championships, and they said, we just want to talk to the genius who told us our sport was going nowhere.
And the flying carrot's in there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you look at all the things that have to come across, how do you decide what ideas to go with and what ideas not to go with? What's your MO? I mean, how do you get your staff in and say, okay, guys, let's run this up the flagpole? Obviously, there must be a procedure.
Well, the first thing, Brent, is that I am just fanatical about build, promote, and achieve, and that anything we do is somehow connected to one or more of those 3 aspirational objectives. And then second, I think part of my responsibility is to be the guy on the bow of the boat who's trying to see where the next opportunities are, and then trying to weigh what are the potentials. And so some things we're going to take a little bit of a risk on, other things are sure bets, but it's my job to keep driving that train and pushing people. So, right now we're looking at new opportunities to help promote swimming in the future, and I think that's a big part of my responsibility.
Do you consider yourself a risk taker?
Calculated risk taker. I'm not afraid to try things, but I always want to protect the organization. And we've had a few things that have failed in the past, but nothing's ever failed financially. And I think as a as a businessman, that's part of my fiduciary responsibility to the organization to make sure whatever risk we take, that we have a safety net.
Looking at Boston now as the bid city for 2024, I guess it is?
24, yes.
24. Where does USA Swimming fit into this whole IOC, USOC, and maybe let's touch a little bit on FINA as far as helping these things happen and also voicing concerns?
Well, to be honest, we're a real bit player in that whole thing. It would be a huge, wonderful thing if Boston were awarded the games, because first of all, it would bring the games to the United States, and that's going to be help with television and sponsors, and the interest in all Olympic sports will rise up. But it'll be great for swimming in that that's a part of the country where we need more facilities. And if the opportunity to have a new major facility in the New England area would be a huge boost to the sport in that region. So there are many reasons why we're rooting for Boston, but to be honest, we don't have a lot of say in how that plays out.
Do you have much say in FINA as far as what decisions they make or where they go with different things?
No.
Do you have a representative that?
Yes. I mean, the challenge that the U.S. has with FINA is you've got, I think there's like 202 nations that are part of FINA. And we as Americans have to recognize that the rest of the world doesn't operate the way we do necessarily, with democratic principles and with openness and transparency. And we're also not very well liked. And because U.S. swimming has been on top of the swimming world for a long time, we're in some ways resented. So politically, in the international arena, it's very difficult to get things done. Because if anything that the U.S. wants to have, everybody else thinks, well, we're just trying to get another advantage for ourselves.
USA Swimming brings a lot to the table for FINA. I mean, there's a lot that happens with the great athletes that are produced from the country and all that. But are you looking forward to Rio? Where are you? Where's that on your radar? Are you thinking Rio now, or are you going to turn the page come the 16?
Well, we're thinking Rio. We're thinking Tokyo in 2020. I mean, we're always looking ahead, but certainly the excitement for Rio is going to be around not only who are the athletes who we know we expect to do well, but who's the next Katie Ledecky? You know, where's that athlete going to come from? And that seems to always happen at Olympic Games.
Isn't that amazing?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's just absolutely wonderful. So the performance of our athletes and who kind of pops up and is new in the scene, and also how the athletes represent our sport and our country. And that's so important, because we see this significant bump in membership after the Olympic Games. It's always our membership jumps 10, 11, 12% in the year after the Olympic Games, and it's a direct result of what kids see on television. So our athletes are role models. Again, it goes back to the achievement, promoting, build, promote, achieve, that rolling wheel.
It certainly does. Well, I guess the only thing right now that's in the news is the starting time of the meet. 10 p.m. at night, and people are having a hard time getting their head around swimmers swimming for such a prestigious, event. The ultimate in their sport. Getting in the water at 10 and sometimes getting out at 1 in the morning. Do you have anything to add to that whole argument or that conversation?
I don't think. I have two comments. The first is, I don't think our athletes and coaches think it's that big a deal. Anybody that lived through the flip-flopping schedule in 2008, where we had preliminaries at night and finals in the morning, I mean, that really upset the apple cart, and our athletes performed incredibly well. So we've taken the attitude of just tell us when we have to swim, and we'll make sure that we're there and we're ready. And I think that's the attitude of our elite level athletes and coaches.
Go ahead.
And the second point I was going to make is it's also another example of how the rest of the world looks at the United States and says, well, see, USA Swimming must have had something to do with that. We had nothing to do with that. But the rest of the world will think, well, that was just one more thing that the U.S. did, and for some reason they think that's an advantage for them. And so it politically, it gets used against us.
Yeah.
But I don't think to be honest, I don't think our top athletes and coaches are all that worried about it.
It would seem to me that those people at that 10 o'clock in Rio might simply be 6 in the afternoon, 6 evening for somebody in Europe. So wait a second, are we looking too hard at this? Because my biological clock is going to be working exactly at that time. So there's a lot of ways to look at that.
Well, there are, and this is why we immediately go from our Olympic trials into a domestic training camp and then into an international training camp. So the Olympic team has the opportunity to transition on their biological clocks and be ready for that. So we've made those arrangements for 2016, and I'm sure our athletes and coaches will be ready.
Awesome. So I think we can pretty much conclude with a lot of different things, but maybe you can just give us what's the greatest thing that you enjoy about this position that you have?
I just like working with the people who love the sport, which I've grown to love, and it makes whether it's other staff members or volunteers or athletes or coaches, I just enjoy working with the people, and I fully accept the role that we're on the one hand kind of servants to the sport, but on the other hand we're expected to lead and to carve new ground for the future. So I think finding that balance is just a great challenge, and I enjoy that.
And I enjoyed the interview.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
This is Brent Rutemiller saying, if you want to win, first help someone else win.